The night began with the sound of breaking glass. No one in the ballroom of the Lexington Tower quite knew what had happened at first. Just a sharp crack that cut through the music, followed by the slow, stunned silence of New York's most powerful people turning their heads. William Adams, the billionaire CEO of Adams Quantum Technologies, stood motionless near the bar, a shard of champagne flute glinting at his feet. His hand trembled ever so slightly. Across the room, the woman everyone had ignored for 6 years finally met his eyes. Madison Perez didn't flinch. Her skin, the color of warm bronze under the crystal chandeliers, shimmered against the deep emerald of her dress. She looked calm, too calm for a woman whose entire life had just been measured, priced, and dismissed. An hour earlier, before the glass shattered, she had been standing behind that same door, watching him through the reflection. William was shaking hands with senators, venture capitalists, and socialites, whose smiles cost more than her annual salary. The jazz band swelled. Every move of his was precise, deliberate, cold. He had been trained for this world-pale suit, pale eyes, pale heart. Madison had not. She was a 31-year-old biotechnologist, a woman who once had a full scholarship to Stanford's molecular biology program. Before William, she had believed in data, in research, in the logic of equations. After William, she had believed in love, or rather, the illusion of it. 6 years earlier, they'd met at a biotech seminar in Boston. He was the guest investor. She was the keynote speaker, a young black woman whose intelligence turned heads and made men twice her age uneasy. When she challenged his theory about genetic monetization, he'd laughed and told her, "You're too idealistic to survive in business." 3 weeks later, he'd offered her a position as his research consultant. 3 months later, she was living in his penthouse on Park Avenue, not as his wife, not even as his official partner, just as someone close enough to care, but invisible enough to forget. In the beginning, she'd told herself it didn't matter. He was brilliant, untouchable, and she had seen flashes of gentleness, a hand brushing her back when she was cold, the quiet gratitude in his eyes when she stayed up, helping him fix a failed algorithm. He was a white man, raised in a world of control and commerce. Affection wasn't something he gave freely. Madison thought patience would make him human. Now, 6 years later, she understood patience had only turned her into a shadow. William approached her that night like he was approaching a delicate experiment. "You shouldn't be here yet." He murmured, his voice low enough for no one else to hear. "The board isn't comfortable seeing you at events like this." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I wasn't aware love needed board approval." His jaw flexed. "Don't make this difficult, Madison." She looked at the glass of champagne in her hand, at her own reflection, trembling in the bubbles. "I've spent 6 years being easy, William. Maybe difficult is overdue." He sighed, the same tired sigh of a man who'd always gotten what he wanted. "We'll talk later." But later never came. At 9:30, when the party was at its brightest, he made his announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, tapping his glass, "I'd like to introduce someone very special." Madison's heart lifted for the briefest foolish moment. Then she saw the woman in red stepping onto the stage. Tiffany Lane, the model, the new brand ambassador of Adams Quantum, blonde hair, porcelain skin, and the kind of practiced smile Madison used to teach herself in mirrors. The room erupted in applause. Madison froze, every beat of her heart echoing inside her skull. When the laughter died down, William turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "I was going to talk to you tonight," he said quietly, almost kindly. "It's time for you to move on." She blinked. "Move on?" He took out an envelope. $50 million. "It's enough for you to live comfortably. You've earned that much." The way he said it earned that much, as if she were a stock option that had finally matured. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered at her feet. That was the sound that silenced the ballroom. For a long moment she just stared at the glittering pieces scattered on the marble floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, almost soft. "Do you remember the first night we met, William? You told me I was too idealistic. You were right, because I believed love could exist without ownership." He shifted uncomfortably. "Madison." She raised her hand, stopping him. "You could have given me nothing and I would have stayed. You gave me everything and I'm leaving." The crowd pretended not to watch, but every ear strained for her words. She smiled faintly, a smile that was both goodbye and release. "You once told me that power means never having to explain yourself. Tonight, I choose a different kind of power, the kind that doesn't need your permission." And she walked out. Outside, the winter wind of Manhattan hit her like a baptism. Snow flurried down, catching in her short curls. For the first time in years, she felt the air in her lungs as her own. The streetlight reflected on her skin, gold against the night. Somewhere above her in that glittering tower, William was probably staring at the door she had just closed. In his world, people didn't leave him. But Madison Perez had just rewritten his rulebook. Back inside, someone whispered, "Who was that woman?" No one answered. She walked until her heels ached, until the cold numbed her fingers, until she reached the tiny apartment in Harlem she had rented under a different name, just in case she ever needed an escape. She had never thought she'd use it. Tonight, it felt like salvation. She hung her coat, sat down, and looked at the envelope still clutched in her hand. $50 million. She placed it on the table unopened. Then she took out a small notebook, her old research journal from years ago, and opened to a blank page. Her pen hovered for a second before she wrote, "Starting point, rebuild, Madison Perez." The words looked fragile, but alive. Her phone buzzed once, William's name flashing on the screen. She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the window and let the city's air rush in. Somewhere far below, a street musician was playing a saxophone, the notes rising like smoke through the night. For the first time in 6 years, Madison smiled, not because she was free, but because she was finally awake. And though her heart trembled, a whisper formed in her mind. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. If you've ever given too much of yourself to someone who didn't see your worth, stay a little longer. Madison's story is only just beginning, and the next chapter will remind you what it means to rise. The city never truly slept, but that night it felt quieter than usual, like Manhattan itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. Madison sat on the edge of her narrow bed, still wearing the emerald dress from the gala, the hem torn where it had brushed against the broken glass. The envelope lay untouched on the nightstand. $50 million. A price tag for 6 years of devotion. A reward for disappearing gracefully. Her phone blinked again. Another call from William. She let it ring until the sound faded into silence. The kind of silence that could split you open. Outside, rain began to fall in thin silver threads streaking down the window pane. Madison pressed her forehead against the cool glass, whispering to no one. Why does freedom always have to come with this much pain? The city lights blurred. In their reflection, she saw not the version of herself William had sculpted, composed, obedient, invisible, but someone raw, alive, unpredictable. For years, she had learned how to lower her voice when he entered a room, how to disappear in public spaces, how to smile politely while his colleagues praised his brilliance. She had turned herself into silence, believing that love would eventually reward restraint. It never did. The next morning, the world went on, as if nothing had changed. Madison took the subway downtown, blending into the crowd like a ghost who had learned to breathe again. Her reflection in the subway window was still unfamiliar, a woman between endings and beginnings. At 8:45 a.m., her phone buzzed with a message. "William, come by the office. We should end things properly." She stared at the text for a long moment, then typed back only one word, "Okay." When she arrived at Adams Tower, the receptionist hesitated before letting her through. The security guard gave her a look she couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe. In the elevator, the mirrored walls reflected too many versions of her. She remembered the first time she'd ridden this same elevator 6 years ago. Full of hope, a folder of research in her hand, her heart racing, because the man upstairs had seen something in her that the world hadn't. Now, the same elevator carried her to an ending. William was waiting in his office. Sleeves rolled up tie, loosened, his expression carefully composed. Behind him, the skyline of New York sprawled like an empire he'd built from ambition and sleepless nights. "Thank you for coming," he said, as though they were business partners wrapping up a contract. "I wanted to see you one last time," she said simply. He gestured toward the envelope on his desk. "That's for you. I'm not taking it back. You earned it." She looked at the envelope, then back at him. "You really think money can erase what you did?" His jaw tightened. "I'm not erasing anything, Madison. I'm compensating. I gave you the best years of my life." She interrupted, her tone soft but steady. "You mean I gave you mine?" He looked away, exhaling sharply. "You knew what this was from the beginning." "Did I?" she asked. "Because I don't remember agreeing to be your shadow." His silence was answer enough. Madison stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. "You once said you didn't want people to think I was with you for the money. I spent 6 years proving that I wasn't. And now you're the one putting a price on me." He flinched, but only slightly. "You're twisting this." "I'm finally untwisting it." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was heavy years, of unspoken things, of nights where she'd waited for him to come home, of mornings where she'd pretended that being unacknowledged was enough. Then she said almost quietly, "I loved you, William. But love without respect isn't devotion, it's decay." He turned away, staring out at the skyline. "You make it sound so cruel." "It is cruel," she whispered. "And you were the one who taught me that." She didn't wait for him to reply. Instead, she picked up the envelope, tore it in half, and let the pieces fall like snow onto the floor. When she left the office, she didn't look back. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet asphalt and freedom. She walked without direction, the rhythm of her heels matching the pulse in her chest. Somewhere between Fifth Avenue and Madison Square Park, she realized that what she felt wasn't grief, it was relief. By noon, she was sitting at a small diner, the kind with chipped cups and the smell of burnt coffee. The waitress smiled at her kindly. "You look like you've just survived a storm, honey." Madison smiled faintly. "Maybe I did." The woman poured her coffee. "Storms are good sometimes. They wash things clean." She nodded, stirring the coffee absently. Her mind wandered to the last 6 years. The early mornings. The late nights. The quiet sacrifices. She remembered staying up to edit his proposals. The pride she felt when his company went public. The ache of realizing he never once said our success. It had always been his. Now it was time for hers. That evening, back in her apartment, Madison found herself staring at the small box she had carried from William's penthouse, a collection of things too sentimental to throw away. His old cufflinks, the watch she'd bought for his first company anniversary, a photograph from a ski trip they never took again. She touched each one not with longing, but with gratitude. They were proof that she had once loved without measure, that she had once believed, and that belief, though painful, had taught her something precious, that survival isn't the opposite of love. It's its evolution. She opened her laptop, the screen flickering to life. The cursor blinked on an empty document. For a long time, she just stared at it. Then her fingers began to move. Words poured out, not about him, but about her. A research proposal she had started years ago, but never finished. Ideas that had lived in notebooks, while she lived in his shadow. The hours slipped by unnoticed. Midnight came and went. When she finally leaned back, the first chapter was complete. The title read, Reconstruction, a Study on Cellular Renewal and Human Resilience. She laughed softly to herself. Fitting. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. Ethan Whitmore. Your old research submission caught my attention. Can we talk? Madison stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. She remembered the name Professor Whitmore, the scientist William had once ridiculed as a dreamer with no business sense. She typed back almost without thinking. When and where? The reply came within minutes. Tomorrow morning, Columbia University, 9 a.m. Madison smiled. The rain began again, gentle this time, tapping softly against the window. She turned off the lights and let the city glow fill the room. In the quiet, she whispered to herself, Tomorrow I start again. Somewhere across town, William sat alone in his penthouse. The city stretched beneath him like a kingdom he could no longer feel. On his desk, the torn pieces of the check still lay scattered. For the first time in years, he didn't have a plan. He reached for his phone, then stopped. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound small. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was punishment. And as Madison finally drifted into sleep, her last thought was simple, clear, and unwavering. You can't put a price on freedom. Because the moment she stopped belonging to him, she finally belonged to herself. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of Columbia University, glinting off the marble floors and rows of glass beakers in the laboratory. Madison stood near the doorway, her fingers brushing against the strap of her worn leather bag. It had been years since she'd walked into a place that smelled like caffeine, chemical solvents, and ambition. Yet here she was again, standing at the edge of something that felt terrifyingly new and beautifully unknown. Madison Perez. A voice called out deep and clear. She turned. The man who spoke was taller than she expected, his expression calm but curious. He extended a hand. Ethan Whitmore. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Madison shook his hand, steadying her breath. I wasn't sure you'd really meant the invitation. He smiled, the kind of smile that seemed to listen before speaking. I don't waste time on things I don't mean. There was no arrogance in his tone, just conviction, and it startled her more than she wanted to admit. They walked across the lab. Beakers gleamed beneath cold light. Students in white coats whispered to each other, sneaking glances at her. Madison could feel their curiosity, but she didn't flinch. After what she had walked away from, a few stares meant nothing. Ethan gestured toward the research board filled with sketches and formulas. I read your old paper on adaptive cellular resilience. There's a sharp mind behind that writing, and a bruised heart, I think. Madison froze, caught off guard. You read emotions in equations. Sometimes the data hides the pain of its creator, he said simply. I'm offering you a chance to rebuild what you abandoned. Join my research team. She hesitated. Why me? He looked at her with something almost like empathy. Because you've been broken once, and people who have been broken often see patterns others can't. His words struck something deep inside her, some quiet truth she had been trying to bury under logic and self-control. "I'll think about it," she said after a long pause. "Do that," he replied gently. "But think with your heart, not your scars." That night, Madison sat at her kitchen table, staring at the offer letter Ethan had emailed. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure. The apartment felt too quiet, her thoughts too loud. For years, she had defined herself through someone else's success. Could she really start over? Could she trust her own brilliance again? She reached for her notebook, flipping through the pages of unfinished formulas and forgotten dreams. Each scribble was a ghost of who she used to be. Somewhere between exhaustion and courage, she made her choice. She typed her reply, "I accept." When she hit send, a strange lightness filled her chest, like she'd opened a window in a room long sealed. 3 weeks later, Madison was back in a lab coat. The first time she picked up a pipette again, her hands trembled slightly. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. He watched from across the room as she adjusted the microscope, her focus sharpening with every second. "Welcome back to the living," he murmured when she finally looked up. Madison smiled faintly. "I didn't realize I'd been gone." "You had," he said quietly. "You just didn't notice." There was something grounding about his presence he didn't demand, didn't rescue, didn't lecture. He simply made space for her to exist. And in that space, she began to remember how it felt to be respected for her mind, not her loyalty. Days bled into nights. They debated over coffee, argued about ethics, laughed over failed experiments. Ethan's calm steadiness was a sharp contrast to William's relentless control. Where William silenced, Ethan questioned. Where William commanded, Ethan invited. But sometimes when Madison stayed late, she still found herself staring at her reflection in the lab glass, half expecting William's shadow to appear behind her. It never did yet. The echo of him lingered. One evening as thunder rolled across the city, Ethan found her sitting alone reviewing data by the faint blue glow of her laptop. "You're still chasing perfection," he said, leaning against the counter. Madison didn't look up. "Perfection's the least I owe myself after all the mistakes." He crossed the room and sat opposite her. "No," he said softly. "You don't owe yourself perfection. You owe yourself peace." She met his eyes for the first time. They were steady, unafraid. "You talk like someone who's already found it." He gave a small laugh. "I've just made peace with the fact that I won't." There was something raw in his honesty. It disarmed her, the simplicity of a man who didn't try to impress her, who didn't need her silence to feel powerful. "Why do you care so much about my work?" she asked suddenly. Ethan leaned forward. "Because it's brilliant. And because somewhere in the middle of all that logic and precision, I see someone trying to heal herself through her science." Madison's throat tightened. "I'm not sure I know how to heal." "Then maybe it's time to learn." The storm outside grew heavier, rain streaking across the tall glass windows. Inside, the lab glowed under a single dim lamp. Madison felt something shift inside her, a quiet warmth, a small crack of trust forming where fear had lived. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel safe. But peace is fragile, and fate rarely offers it, without consequence. The next morning when Madison arrived, a headline was waiting for her. Ex-partner of tech billionaire William Adams joins Columbia Research under controversial mentor. She stared at the screen, her stomach turning. There it was. The past she thought she'd buried, resurrected for clicks and gossip. William's name, her name, and whispers about a former mistress seeking validation. Her fingers trembled. Ethan entered moments later holding a coffee. He stopped when he saw her face. Madison. She turned the screen toward him silently. He read the headline, his jaw tightening, but his voice stayed calm. Let me guess. Tabloids. She nodded. It'll spread. It always does. He set the coffee down and crossed his arms. Let it. Her head snapped up. Let it. You don't understand, this could destroy everything I've worked for. No, he said evenly. They can't destroy what's already being rebuilt. They can only test how badly you want it. She stared at him, searching for any hint of pity. There was none. Just belief. Madison, he said softer now, you can't control what they write. You can only control what you give them to write about next. She drew a shaky breath, trying to steady the storm inside her. Later that day, when the reporters called for a comment, Madison gave them one simple statement. The only story that defines me is the one I'm still writing. It ran in small print, buried beneath the noise, but it was enough. That night she stayed late again, working under the sterile hum of the fluorescent lights. Ethan was gone, the building quiet, except for the rain. Madison opened her notebook and wrote one sentence across the top page. Healing is not forgetting. It's remembering without fear. Then she underlined it. Twice. Somewhere far uptown, William Adams sat in his penthouse office, the same headline open on his laptop. He stared at her name longer than he meant to. The sight of it ignited something sharp, a flicker of regret, jealousy, maybe both. He didn't recognize the woman in the photograph anymore, and for the first time since she'd left, that terrified him. Down in the lab, Madison kept writing, unaware that her past was already circling back toward her, closer, quieter, and far more dangerous than she could imagine. The first thing Madison noticed that morning was the sound, the low, insistent hum of whispers. It crawled through the hallways of the research building before she even reached her office. By the time she stepped inside, a dozen eyes had already found her. Some sympathetic, most curious. The scandal had spread overnight. The internet had eaten her alive. Ex-lover of tech billionaire joins prestigious program under questionable mentorship. Sleeping her way from business to academia, from penthouse to lab coat. Every line was venom, disguised as curiosity. Her inbox was full, journalists asking for comments, her funding committee requesting a statement. But it wasn't the noise that hurt. It was the silence from people who once called her colleague. Madison set her bag down and forced her breath to steady. She had survived worse. She had survived him. Ethan entered a moment later holding 2 coffees. His eyes met hers, and in that glance she knew he had seen everything too. Don't read them, he said quietly, setting 1 cup beside her. I already did. He exhaled. Then you know they'll die out faster if you don't feed them. She let out a bitter laugh. They don't die. They evolve. They'll find another angle, another picture, another headline. They always do. Ethan hesitated, then leaned against the desk. Do you want to know what I think? No, she replied dryly. But you'll tell me anyway. He smiled faintly. I think you're scared they might be right. Her eyes flashed. Right about what? That I slept my way to success. He didn't flinch. No. That you're still living like you need to prove you didn't. Madison froze. The truth in his words cut deeper than the lies online ever could. I just want to be seen for what I do, she murmured. Then stop fighting to be seen and start showing, he said simply. You're not invisible anymore, Madison. But visibility comes with fire. Let them burn if they want. You just keep walking. His calm steadiness anchored her in a way she didn't understand. For the rest of the day she worked without distraction, diving into her project with surgical precision. Yet every few hours, she caught Ethan's gaze from across the room, quiet, protective, but never possessive. That night, when the lab emptied out, he stayed behind. Rain drummed against the glass, the city a blur of movement below. Madison rubbed her temples, exhaustion settling in. "You should go home," Ethan said softly. "I don't know where that is anymore," she replied, half a whisper. He tilted his head. "Then maybe you're building it right here." She looked at him, searching for meaning. His voice was warm, but steady, not a savior's, just a man offering presence. "Do you ever get tired of fixing broken people?" she asked. Ethan's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Only the ones who don't realize they're already healing." For the first time, she didn't know what to say. Days passed, and the story began to fade, just as Ethan had predicted. But silence, Madison learned, doesn't mean peace. It only means the next blow is loading. It came on a Thursday afternoon. She was in the middle of a presentation when her phone buzzed with a private message. "Unknown sender, you can change your name, but you'll always be his mistress." Attached was a photo her leaving William's penthouse years ago. Blurry but damning. Her chest constricted. How? Who still had that? After the presentation, she found Ethan in his office, the photo already on his screen. Someone had sent it to the university's media board. "Who leaked this?" she demanded. "We don't know yet," he said carefully, "but we'll find out." She stared at the image herself, younger, naive, stepping into a cab while William's reflection lingered in the glass behind her. It was a ghost, frozen in pixels. Ethan watched her. "You don't have to defend that version of you." "She was stupid," Madison muttered. "She was in love," he corrected. "There's a difference." She looked up sharply. "You sound like you know something about that." He gave a dry chuckle. "I was married once." Her brows lifted. "And she left," he said simply. Apparently loving a man who talks more to his microscopes than to her wasn't much of a life plan. Madison's lips curved slightly, despite the heaviness between them. "So that's why you understand broken things." He shrugged. "We recognize each other." Later that night, she sat in her apartment, the photo still glowing on her phone. Every instinct told her to call William, to demand answers, to ask why her past wouldn't stay buried. But she didn't. Instead, she poured herself a glass of wine and turned on the radio, the soft hum of jazz filling the silence. Her mind drifted back to the night she'd left him, the way he'd looked at her, not with anger, but disbelief, as if he couldn't imagine a world where she existed beyond his orbit. And maybe that was the problem. For too long, she had revolved around him. Her phone buzzed again this time, with a message from an unfamiliar number. "I warned you not to embarrass him." Madison froze the wine glass trembling in her hand. Whoever it was, they knew exactly how to find her. Her pulse quickened. She typed back, "Who is this?" No response. Moments later, her door buzzer rang. Once, twice. She stood still, heart racing, then peeked through the peephole. No one. Just the echo of footsteps fading down the hall. The next morning, she arrived at the lab, pale but composed. Ethan noticed immediately. "You didn't sleep," he said. "Someone sent me a message," she admitted. His eyes darkened. "Show me." She hesitated, then handed him her phone. As he read, his jaw clenched. "This isn't random. Whoever's doing this wants you rattled." "Maybe they've succeeded," she said quietly. He looked at her, then really looked. "Madison, whoever's trying to drag you down doesn't know who they're dealing with. But I do. So let me help." Her instinct was to refuse. She had learned the cost of letting a man take control. But this wasn't control. It was alliance. She nodded slowly. "All right." By evening, Ethan had called in a friend, a cybersecurity expert, to trace the messages. The result came hours later. The emails had been routed through a private network connected to Adams Global Holdings. Madison went cold. William. Ethan's voice hardened. Or someone working for him. She laughed under her breath, bitter and broken. Of course. He couldn't stand not owning the narrative. Ethan placed a hand on her arm. Then maybe it's time you take it back. She met his gaze. There it was again, the same steadiness, the quiet belief she had once lost faith in. Tomorrow, she said. I'll confront him myself. Are you sure? Yes. Her voice didn't waver. He took 6 years from me. He doesn't get to take my peace, too. Ethan's eyes softened. Then I'll be here when you get back. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the air between them thick with something unspoken. Then she turned away, whispering more to herself than to him. This ends where it began. Across the city in his penthouse above Park Avenue, William Adams poured himself another drink. The room was quiet, except for the soft thud of ice in glass. On his laptop screen glowed a single photo, the same one that had surfaced online. He stared at it for a long time, jaw tight. She shouldn't have come back into the spotlight, he muttered. But even as he said it, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, longing, maybe guilt. He closed the laptop abruptly and leaned back, the city lights spilling across his face. She was supposed to disappear, he whispered. The sound of his own voice lingered in the room like a confession. And somewhere across the city, Madison lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unaware that the man she was preparing to confront had already started to lose sleep over her. The city was still half asleep when Madison stepped out of the cab in front of Adams Tower. The building loomed above her, cold, immaculate, and mercilessly tall, like a monument to the man who had once built his empire on precision and silence. The revolving doors glimmered under the early morning light, reflecting her face, back at her, composed but burning inside. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and walked in. Ms. Perez, the receptionist's tone faltered when she looked up. There was hesitation, maybe even sympathy, but Madison didn't need it. He's in already, the woman said softly. Good, Madison replied. Tell him I'm coming up. The elevator hummed as it ascended its mirrored walls, capturing fragments of her jaw, clenched eyes, steady heart, drumming in her chest. Each floor number that blinked past felt like another layer of the past peeling away. When the doors opened on the 60th floor, the air was too still. William stood near the window, hands in his pockets, the skyline sprawling beneath him. He didn't turn right away, but his voice came calm and controlled, as if he had been rehearsing this moment. I was wondering when you'd show up. Madison closed the door behind her. You didn't leave me much choice. He turned. Then his eyes, those icy, unreadable eyes, meeting hers. If this is about the photo, it wasn't me. Wasn't you? She repeated, her tone sharp. The messages came from your company's network, William. Don't tell me you don't know who's playing your game. I don't control everything that happens in my company, he said flatly. Don't lie to me, she cut in. You control everyone around you. You always have. He exhaled, the sound more weary than angry. You think I care enough to sabotage your career? Madison, you walked away. You made that choice. I made the choice, she said quietly, to stop living in your shadow. But that doesn't mean you get to throw it over me again whenever you please. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them was alive, tense, electric, heavy with years of everything they hadn't said. William finally spoke, softer this time. You think I sent that picture because I wanted revenge. You overestimate how much power you still have over me. Maybe, she said. Or maybe you're underestimating how much I see through you now. Something flickered across his face, a flash of emotion he tried to bury under indifference. What do you want, Madison? She met his gaze. The truth. He hesitated, then crossed to the desk, pulled open a drawer, and tossed an envelope onto the surface. You want truth there. That's your truth. Madison frowned, opening the envelope. Inside were printed emails, internal communications between Adam's global executives. Her stomach tightened as she scanned the words. Someone had ordered a private investigator to track her movements after she left him. Her phone, her address, her research affiliations, all monitored. Her eyes lifted, cold fury burning now. You did have me followed. William's jaw tightened. For security reasons. Security. Her voice trembled with restrained anger. You mean ownership? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You disappeared without warning. After 6 years, you think I wouldn't worry where you went. Worry, she repeated bitterly. You didn't worry, William. You just couldn't stand not knowing if someone else had what you lost. He froze. The words hit like a bullet. For the first time, Madison saw him falter, saw the man behind the armor. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was fragile. Do you hate me that much? He asked finally. She let out a breath, quieter now. No. I hate the version of me that believed you were the only person who could make me whole. William's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. I never asked you to depend on me. You didn't have to, she said. You built a world where that was the only way to survive. He looked away, jaw tight. Maybe I was trying to protect you. From what? From the noise. From the people who would tear you apart the moment they smelled blood. Madison laughed softly without humor. Newsflash, they already have. And you gave them the scent. He flinched. For once, his perfect composure cracked. I didn't mean for this to happen. Of course you didn't, she said quietly. You never mean for anything to happen, William. Things just break around you. He said nothing. The air between them stretched thin. Finally, she folded the papers and set them back on the desk. I came here to end this. Not to fight, not to hate, just to finish. His voice lowered. You really think walking away again will fix everything? I'm not walking away, she said. I'm reclaiming what you tried to erase. He took a step forward, the distance between them shrinking. You're not the only one who lost something, Madison. She met his gaze steadily. You didn't lose me, William. You never had me. Something in his face broke then, not visibly, but deeply. He looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time, and realizing she was already gone. I never wanted to hurt you, he said quietly. I know, she replied. That's what makes it worse. The elevator doors closed behind her a few minutes later. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She just breathed slow, deliberate breaths, each one loosening the weight that had sat on her chest for years. That evening, she met Ethan at a small cafe near campus. He was already there, reading through her latest lab notes, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. How did it go? He asked without looking up. It's done, she said simply, sitting down across from him. He glanced at her, studying her face. You look lighter. Maybe I am. He leaned back, nodding slowly. Closure looks good on you. She smiled faintly, stirring her coffee. It doesn't feel like closure, more like clarity. Ethan tilted his head. Sometimes they're the same thing. They fell into a quiet conversation, the kind that felt easy and unforced. He spoke about his new experiment. She teased him about his terrible handwriting. For the first time in months, she laughed a real, unguarded laugh. It startled her how natural it felt. When the rain began outside, Ethan offered to walk her home. They moved through the streets of Manhattan, under one umbrella, the sound of rain softening the city's sharp edges. Somewhere between the puddles and the traffic lights, Madison realized she wasn't thinking about William anymore. The ache that had once felt endless was fading, replaced by something gentler, something like peace. At her building, she stopped at the steps, turning to him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me that not every man wants to own what he admires." Ethan's lips curved into a small smile. "Good. Then maybe one day you'll stop looking at me like you're waiting for the catch." She hesitated, meeting his eyes. Maybe one day there won't be one. For a moment, the city disappeared around them. The noise, the lights, the past. There was only the warmth between two people who understood what it meant to lose and to choose again. As she went inside, Madison glanced over her shoulder. Ethan was still standing there in the rain, watching her go, not to possess, but to be sure she got home safe. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like someone's shadow. She felt like her own light. And somewhere high above the city, William Adams stood at his window, watching the same rain, realizing that the woman he once tried to control had become the only thing in his life he could never have again. The city was painted in amber that evening, the kind of Manhattan twilight that blurs the line between endings and beginnings. Madison stood by the lab's wide glass window, her reflection layered over the skyline. Behind her, the low hum of machines whispered, rhythmic and familiar. It should have felt like progress. Instead, something inside her felt unbearably still. Long Day Ethan's voice came softly from the doorway. Madison turned, forcing a smile. "When is it not?" He stepped inside, rolling up his sleeves, the gesture casual, grounding. "You've been staring at those readings for an hour. Whatever you're looking for, it's not in the data." She let out a quiet breath. "I keep thinking if I can perfect this, maybe everything else will make sense." Ethan leaned against the desk, arms folded. "Science doesn't heal heartbreak, Madison." "Doesn't it?" she murmured, half to herself. "It's about control, proof. You fix what's broken, you make it right." He studied her for a long moment before replying. "Sometimes what's broken isn't meant to be fixed, just understood." Madison turned back toward the window, her jaw tightening. "I don't need understanding. I need results." Ethan's tone softened. "You need rest." She gave a quiet laugh. "If you say that one more time, I'll start charging you for therapy sessions." He smiled, stepping closer. "Then I'll pay double." The air between them shifted, unspoken, fragile. For weeks they had danced around something unnamed, a quiet current neither of them dared to touch. He looked at her like he could see everything she was afraid to say. She looked at him like she was afraid to believe him. But before the silence could turn into something more, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced down, and his expression changed, calm, dissolving into concern. "What is it?" Madison asked. He hesitated, then turned the screen toward her. A news alert. Adams Global faces SEC investigation for data manipulation. Madison's breath caught. "William." Ethan nodded grimly. "Looks like the empire's cracking." She stared at the headline, her pulse quickening. It shouldn't have affected her. He was part of a past she'd buried, but the memories surged anyway. Late nights spent reviewing reports for him, catching inconsistencies he brushed aside. He used to joke that she was his conscience. Now it seemed the absence of that conscience was finally catching up to him. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked quietly. Madison blinked, realizing her hands had clenched into fists. "I don't know." "Then don't pretend to be." She swallowed her throat tight. He's not a bad man, Ethan. Just one who forgot how to be good. Ethan watched her carefully. And do you still feel responsible for him? She didn't answer. Instead, she looked back out the window, where the last of the sun disappeared behind the skyline. That night, sleep refused to come. Madison sat on her couch, the television muted but flickering with the same story. William Adams, under investigation for falsified investment data, in partnership with Gen Axis Technologies. His calm, polished face filled the screen as reporters shouted questions he didn't answer. Her phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. Her chest tightened. She hesitated, then answered. Madison. His voice came low, rough, familiar, in a way that made her heart skip. For a long second, she couldn't speak. You shouldn't be calling me. I know, William said. But I didn't know who else to call. She closed her eyes. What do you want? Not forgiveness, he said quietly. Just a chance to explain. She let out a hollow laugh. You had 6 years for that. I didn't have the words then. And now you do. I'm trying, he said. They're tearing everything apart, Madison. The company, the board, my name. Your name, she cut in. That's what it's always been about. There was silence. Then softer, you used to believe in me. I used to believe in a lot of things, she replied. He exhaled, the sound frayed. They're saying I falsified data, that I manipulated outcomes for the Gen Axis project. I didn't. At least, not intentionally. Madison frowned, tension coiling in her stomach. Then why are you calling me? Because you're the only one who might still believe. I didn't mean to. She almost laughed. That's not belief, William. That's denial. I need your help, he said quietly. You know the science behind it. You know the work we did back then. It wasn't fraud. You could prove that. Her voice dropped. You want me to save you? No, he said after a pause. I want you to see that I'm not the monster you think I am. She felt the walls closing in. I can't go back there. I'm not asking you to, he said. I'm asking you to remember who I was before all this, before the headlines, before I lost you. She swallowed hard, words caught in her throat. You didn't lose me, William. You let me go. Then maybe that was my first mistake. Before she could respond, the call ended. The silence that followed was unbearable. The next morning, Madison arrived at the lab early, her eyes shadowed, but her resolve steady. Ethan was already there, reviewing test logs. You didn't sleep, he said without looking up. I didn't try. He glanced at her, his expression shifting when he saw the conflict in her face. He called, didn't he? Madison didn't answer. She didn't have to. Ethan set the tablet down, leaning back. Let me guess, he needs your help to fix something only you can fix. Something like that. Are you going to? She hesitated. If what they're accusing him of isn't true, then maybe I'm the only one who can clear it. But if it is true, then you'd rather not know. Ethan finished. She met his gaze. Wouldn't you? He shook his head. No, I'd rather know the truth even if it ruins me. Madison turned away, his words landing heavier than he intended. You always make it sound so simple. It's not simple, he said quietly. It's just honest. The rest of the day passed in a blur of equations and tests. But her mind wasn't in the lab. Every formula blurred into memory. William's voice, his arrogance, his impossible charm, his collapse. That evening, she found herself standing outside the federal courthouse. She didn't know why she came, curiosity, pity, closure. Maybe all three. Cameras flashed as William exited the building flanked by attorneys. He looked smaller than she remembered, not in stature, but in spirit. When his eyes found her through the crowd, he froze. For a moment, neither moved. Then, with quiet defiance, she turned and walked away. That night, back at the lab, Ethan found her alone again, watching data scroll across the monitor. "I saw the news," he said gently. "You went there." She nodded. "I needed to see it for myself." And Madison hesitated. He looked lost. "Good," Ethan said. "Maybe it's time he does." She gave a small, tired smile. "You really don't believe in mercy, do you?" "I believe in accountability," he replied. Madison looked up at him, her voice almost a whisper. "Do you think people like him can change?" Ethan's answer came slow and measured. "Only if they lose something that matters enough to wake them up." Her eyes softened. "And what if they already did? Then they learned to live with the echo." The room fell quiet again. Madison turned off the monitor, standing close enough to see the reflection of her own face in his eyes. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what?" "For not asking me to be okay." He smiled faintly. "You don't have to be. You just have to keep going." Madison nodded, and for the first time in days, she felt something close to peace. Not because the storm was over, but because she finally stopped trying to control where it landed. Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady, washing the city clean for a moment that wouldn't last, but would be remembered. The city was tense that morning, gray skies pressing low, the kind of heaviness that carried news before it was spoken. Madison stood in the university corridor, the echo of hurried footsteps filling the air. Something had happened. She could feel it before she saw it. "Did you hear?" one of the interns whispered as she passed. "Adams Global. It's all over the news." Madison's stomach tightened. She opened her phone. The headline burned against the screen: "William Adams arrested in connection to SEC fraud investigation." The image that followed stole her breath, William being led out of a black sedan, handcuffed, but composed, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. There was no fight, no anger, just that calm arrogance she once mistook for strength. She stared at the photo until the letters blurred. She'd thought she was past caring, but the sharp, unexpected sting in her chest told her otherwise. Behind her, Ethan's voice came low and careful. "You saw it." Madison turned, unable to hide the turmoil in her eyes. "He's being charged. They're calling it corporate manipulation. Millions in false reports, fraudulent partnerships. It's what he built on." Ethan finished. "The truth always waits." She closed her phone, her voice barely steady. "He wasn't supposed to fall like this." Ethan studied her. "You're still trying to make sense of it." She exhaled shakily. "Because I knew that version of him, the one who planned every move like a chess game. He doesn't make mistakes like this. People like him don't think it's a mistake," Ethan said quietly. "They think it's strategy until the ground gives out." Madison looked at him. "And you think he deserves this?" "I think," Ethan replied, "that you can't spend your life cleaning up someone else's mess." Her throat tightened. "Maybe I'm not trying to clean it up. Maybe I'm just trying to understand when the man I knew turned into the man the world sees now." He didn't answer. The silence between them wasn't cold, but weighted with the ache of someone trying to protect her from herself. Later that night, she found herself walking without destination. The air was cool, the streets slick with recent rain. Somewhere between 5th and Madison Avenue, she realized her feet were leading her toward the courthouse. She didn't mean to go there, but some invisible pull drew her forward. The crowd had thinned, but a few reporters lingered under umbrellas, waiting for the next headline. Madison stayed in the shadows, watching the black SUV parked outside. Then the door opened. William stepped out, no handcuffs now, but the restraint was all over his face. For the first time, he looked human. His eyes caught hers across the distance, and something flickered surprise, then quiet understanding. He said something to his lawyer, then walked toward her. The closer he came, the more she saw how much the arrogance had faded. The crisp perfection of his suit couldn't hide the fatigue in his posture. "Madison," he said, when he reached her voice rough. "You shouldn't be here." "I could say the same," she replied softly. A faint, humorless smile curved his lips. "You came to see if I'd finally fallen. I came to see if you'd finally changed." He looked at her for a long moment, rain catching in his hair, jaw clenched. "I'm sorry." She almost didn't hear him. "For what?" "For everything," he said. "For the years I made you small. For choosing pride over peace. For thinking love was something I could control." Madison swallowed hard. "You don't get to rewrite what you did by saying sorry, William." "I know," he said quietly, "but I'm saying it anyway." There was no performance in his tone this time. No cold charm, no defense. Just a man stripped of armor, trying to find the right words in the ruins. She looked away. "They'll tear you apart for this." He nodded once. "Maybe I deserve it." "You don't," she whispered, surprising even herself. "But you did it to yourself." His eyes softened. "You sound just like you used to. Too kind for your own good." "I'm not kind," she said. "Just tired." They stood there in silence, the rain falling harder now, drumming against the pavement like a heartbeat that didn't belong to either of them. Finally, he spoke again. "They're freezing my accounts. My board has turned on me. Everything's gone. And what do you want from me, William?" "Nothing," he said after a pause. "Just to know that somewhere in all of it, I wasn't completely unforgivable." Madison's eyes met his. "You were never unforgivable. Just unreachable." For a brief second, the man she once loved flickered through the cracks the way he used to look at her, before ambition devoured everything soft in him. He took a step closer and she didn't move away. "I didn't call the tabloids," he said suddenly. "About the photos, the gossip, the stories someone at the firm did. I tried to stop it, but it was already too late." She studied him carefully. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because it matters to me that you know. I didn't want to humiliate you." Her breath hitched. "That's the thing, William. You didn't need to humiliate me. You just forgot I existed." He winced, the truth landing harder than blame ever could. "I'm sorry," he said again, quieter this time. She nodded slowly. "You keep saying that, because it's all I have left to give." The next day, Madison was called to testify not as a witness for the prosecution, but as a consultant, someone who had once worked on early drafts of his company's data models. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was walking back into the empire she'd helped build, only now to confirm its cracks. Ethan tried to stop her. "You don't owe him anything," he said, his voice low, controlled. "This isn't for him," she replied. "It's for me. I need to see it through." He sighed, defeated but understanding. "Then promise me one thing. What when you walk out of that courtroom? Leave him there. Don't carry what isn't yours anymore." She met his gaze, her voice a whisper. "I'll try." The courtroom was cold. Cameras clicked. Lawyers murmured. When Madison took the stand, she felt every stare like static against her skin. William sat across the room, his face unreadable. The prosecutor asked about data formulas, timelines, validations. She answered each question calmly, professionally. But when they asked whether she believed the falsifications were intentional, she hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward him. William didn't move, didn't plead. He just looked at her, the way he used to, when he was certain she'd understand what he couldn't say. Madison's voice broke the silence. I believe the truth was lost, the moment pride became more important than purpose. A murmur rippled through the room. She didn't look away from him. When it ended, William didn't approach her. He simply nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement, an ending that needed no words. That night, Madison returned to the lab. Ethan was there waiting in the dim light. You did it, he said softly. She sat down beside him, exhausted. No, I just told the truth. He looked at her, something unspoken flickering between them. That's more than most people do. Madison leaned back, eyes closed. Do you ever wonder if love and damage come from the same place? Ethan smiled faintly. Only when the heart can't tell the difference. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. And you? I learned that love isn't about saving someone, he said. It's about standing beside them while they save themselves. The air grew still between them, soft, and waited. Madison didn't reply. She didn't need to, because for the first time in years, she wasn't standing in anyone's shadow. Not his, not William's. Outside, the storm had passed. The city lights reflected off puddles like scattered stars. And in that quiet glow, Madison realized that redemption didn't always come wrapped in forgiveness. Sometimes it arrived as peace. The trial had ended, but the echoes refused to fade. Manhattan was colder now, wrapped in the gray hush of early winter. The kind of cold that seeped beneath skin and memory alike. Madison stood by the window of her apartment, mug of tea cooling in her hand. The morning light was pale and unkind, spilling across stacks of research papers she hadn't touched in days. It was strange, she thought, how quiet victory could feel. She had told the truth, cleared her conscience, and walked away. But peace wasn't the silence she expected. It was the sound of absence. A knock came at the door. She hesitated, heart skipping before she even moved. Some part of her already knew. When she opened it, William stood there. He looked different, not just tired, but emptied. The power that once radiated from him like heat was gone. His suit was still immaculate, but it hung loose at the shoulders, as if the weight of his name no longer fit him. May I come in? His voice was low, almost uncertain. She stepped aside without a word. He entered quietly, glancing around the small apartment. I didn't expect this, he murmured. This what? The simplicity, he said. You used to live surrounded by marble and glass. I learned you can't see yourself clearly when everything reflects you back, she replied. He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. I deserved that. Silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile. Finally, she said, Why are you here, William? He took a breath, his hands curling into fists before releasing. The charges were dropped. Insufficient evidence. The board still forced me out, though. I'm done. She nodded, unmoved. You wanted freedom once. Remember? Maybe this is it. He gave a quiet laugh, bitter at the edges. Funny. It doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like losing gravity. Maybe that's what falling really is, she said softly. He looked at her, the corner of his mouth twitching. You always had a way of turning pain into poetry. Madison turned toward the window, unwilling to let the old rhythm pull her back. You didn't come here just to tell me you lost your company. He hesitated. No, I came because I don't know who I am without it. Without you. She froze. The confession wasn't loud, but it landed with the force of years. William, she said quietly, you were someone before me. He shook his head. I was ambition in a suit. You were the only thing that ever made me human. Madison's chest tightened, but she didn't move. And what are you, How? I'm trying to find out, he admitted. I thought I'd come here to apologize again. But standing here, I realize I just needed to see if you were still real. If I didn't dream you. Her voice softened. You didn't dream me. You just didn't see me when I was right in front of you. He exhaled slowly, eyes glimmering with regret. I see you now. Madison looked at him, really looked. The sharpness in him had dulled, replaced by something fragile, almost tender. For a brief moment, the ache of what they'd been hovered between them, tempting and dangerous. She spoke before the silence could turn into something it shouldn't. You hurt me, William. You broke me in ways I didn't even understand until I started healing. I can't go back there. He nodded once, jaw tight. I know. Then why are you here? Because even if I can't have your forgiveness, he said quietly, I need you to know I finally learned what love isn't. She blinked, surprised. And what is it not? It's not possession. It's not winning. It's not silence. He paused, the words heavy with self-awareness. It's what you gave me, and what I never knew how to give back. Madison looked away, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. You're late, William. I know, he whispered. But for what it's worth, I'm finally on time for myself. He left without asking for more. The door closed softly, leaving behind the scent of his cologne and the echo of a past that no longer hurt but hadn't fully healed. That night, Madison walked along the Hudson, the city lights glittering like fragments of 1,000 unfinished stories. The wind was sharp, but it felt clean, almost purifying. Somewhere deep inside, she realized she didn't hate him. She had simply outgrown the version of herself that needed him. Her phone buzzed. Ethan. You still at the lab? She smiled faintly at the message, typing back, walking, thinking. I'll be there soon. When she arrived, the building was nearly empty. Ethan was still there, as he always was, patient, grounded, unassuming. He looked up when she entered, reading her expression, before she spoke. He came to see you, he said quietly. She nodded. Yes. Ethan waited, and Madison took a deep breath. He's broken. But this time, it's not my job to fix him. Ethan studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Good. She tilted her head, half smiling. You don't even ask if I'm okay. Because you are, he said simply. Maybe not fine, maybe not happy, but okay. The difference matters. Madison chuckled softly. You always say things like you've already read the ending. He leaned back against the desk. Maybe I just trust the author. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Steady, unhurried, real. I used to think love was fire, Madison murmured. Now I think it's something quieter, like a heartbeat you don't have to chase. Ethan smiled faintly. Then stop running. She looked at him, the hint of a tear glinting like glass, before she blinked it away. You make it sound easy. It's not, he said. But you've already done the hardest part. What's that? Letting go of what you thought love should look like. They worked late that night, side by side, the air filled with quiet focus and occasional laughter. For the first time in months, Madison didn't feel like she was surviving anything. She was simply living. When the clock neared midnight, Ethan stood and stretched. You should head home. She shook her head. Home's here tonight. He paused, looking at her, really looking. Then he nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. Outside, the snow began to fall, soft and slow. The city seemed gentler under it, as if the world itself had exhaled. Madison glanced at Ethan, who was watching the snowfall through the glass. "You know what's strange?" she said. "I used to think love was about finding someone who completed you. Now I think it's about finding someone who reminds you you were already whole." He turned toward her eyes, warm. "Then I hope you never forget that again." Madison smiled. "I won't." And for the first time, she believed it. Across town, William Adams sat alone in a hotel suite, overlooking the same falling snow. The television played softly, his name flashing across the bottom of the screen's speculation scandal survival. He muted the sound, staring out at the white skyline. In his hand was a small photograph, a candid shot of Madison years ago, laughing at something he'd said. He traced her outline with his thumb, then set the photo down carefully. He didn't drink that night. He didn't make calls or plans. He simply sat in silence, listening to the storm outside and the faint pulse of something he hadn't felt in years: remorse and maybe redemption. For the first time, he didn't think about rebuilding his empire. He thought about rebuilding himself. And somewhere across the city, in a quiet lab filled with soft light and new beginnings, Madison Perez closed her notebook and smiled to herself without regret, without longing, just peace. The snow kept falling. The world kept turning. And between one heartbeat and the next, what was once broken finally began to heal. Spring came late that year. The city thawed slowly, like it was afraid to believe in warmth again. Snowmelt turned to silver rivers along the curbs. Trees dressed themselves in hesitant green, and sunlight began to linger longer on the glass of the high-rises. Madison stood on the rooftop of the research center, wind tangling her hair. She closed her eyes, letting the hum of the city fill her lungs. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for anything. No apology, no validation, no redemption. Just stillness. Behind her, a familiar voice broke the quiet. "You disappear for hours, and I find you chasing the wind again." She turned to see Ethan holding 2 cups of coffee. His tie loosened, eyes soft with amusement. Madison smiled. "I wasn't disappearing, just remembering how to exist." He handed her a cup. "You've gotten good at that. Existing, living," he corrected gently. She took a sip, the warmth grounding her. "You make it sound like a miracle." He leaned on the railing beside her. "It is. Some people spend their whole lives surviving the ghosts of who they were." Madison looked at him, the corners of her lips curving. "You always sound like a professor in confession." Ethan chuckled. "Maybe I'm just stating the obvious." "You've changed." "I had to," she said softly. "I was tired of living in fragments." Later that day, she received an envelope. No sender, no name. Inside was a single note written in William's unmistakable handwriting. "For once, I'm learning how to live quietly. Thank you for teaching me what silence can mean when it's not about control." Beneath it was a check, not for millions, not a bribe, but a donation slip made in her name to a women's foundation for leadership in science. Attached was a short line: "For the voices I once silenced, including yours." Madison held the note for a long time, her fingers tracing the neat, careful letters. There was no ache this time, only a quiet gratitude. He wasn't asking to return. He was finally learning to let go. She folded the letter carefully, placed it in her drawer, and exhaled. That chapter, she knew, had closed. Weeks turned into months. The world moved on. The tabloids found new scandals, new names, new obsessions. Madison found rhythm again, mornings spent teaching, evenings writing, nights filled with laughter instead of insomnia. But there were moments between the noise and the calm when her mind would drift to the woman she used to be, to the man she once loved, to the line between ruin and rebirth she had walked so many times. One evening after a long day at the lab, Ethan appeared at her office door. "Walk with me," he asked. She looked up from her notes, a smile tugging at her lips. "Only if there's food involved." "There's always food involved," he said with mock seriousness. They left the building together, stepping into the late spring dusk. The air smelled of rain and blooming magnolia. The city buzzed around them alive, but softened like it was learning gentleness after too long being hard. They walked side by side, talking about everything and nothing. Her new project, his absurd dislike of jazz, a shared memory of burnt coffee and broken test tubes. Somewhere along the way, their laughter quieted, replaced by something slower, more deliberate. "You know," Ethan said after a while, "it's strange. You spend years running from someone who hurt you, and one day you realize you've stopped running, not because you found safety, but because you became it." Madison looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you talking about me or yourself?" He smiled, a little sad, a little certain. Both, maybe. They reached the small park near the river, where streetlights shimmered against the water. She sat on a bench, pulling her coat closer as a cool breeze passed through. Ethan sat beside her, quiet for a moment before speaking again. "Do you ever wonder if we meet people to teach us what love isn't, before we learn what it is?" She thought of William, his brilliance, his control, his downfall. Then of Ethan. Steady, kind, patient in ways that didn't demand, didn't break. "Yes," she said finally. "I think love is less about finding the right person and more about becoming the right version of yourself." He turned toward her. "And which version are you now?" Madison smiled softly. "One that finally knows she's enough." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full. Ethan's gaze lingered on her face, searching, questioning, but not pressing. Then, without speaking, he reached out and brushed his thumb gently across her hand. It was a simple touch, but it held the weight of everything they hadn't said. The years she'd spent building walls, the nights he'd waited for her to let them fall. "Madison," he began, his voice barely more than a breath. "If I ever hurt you." "You won't," she interrupted softly. "Because you're not trying to own me. You're just standing next to me." He exhaled a quiet smile, ghosting his lips. "Then I'll keep standing right here." And she believed him. A week later, Madison presented her new research at an international conference. As she stood under the lights, her voice steady, her words confident, she caught her reflection in the glass wall opposite the stage. Not the woman she used to be, the one who smiled for someone else's approval. This one was different. Her eyes carried peace, where once there was exhaustion. Her voice no longer trembled when it mattered most. After the applause, she walked off stage to find Ethan waiting by the exit, a quiet pride in his eyes. "You were brilliant," he said simply. She laughed, shaking her head. "I was terrified. That's how you know it mattered." As they walked out together, Madison realized something profound. Endings don't always look like closure. They look like continuation. The love that once destroyed her had led her to the love that didn't need to. That night, they returned to the rooftop where it all began. The city glittered below, endless and alive. Madison leaned against the railing, breathing in the hum of Manhattan. The chaos, the beauty, the ache, the heartbeat of everything she had learned to forgive. Ethan joined her, setting down 2 glasses of wine. "To what are we drinking tonight?" he asked. Madison smiled, eyes on the horizon. "To what remains." He raised his glass. "And what's that?" She turned to him, her voice soft but certain. "Hope." They clinked their glasses gently, the sound barely audible against the wind. Far below, taxis moved like fireflies through the streets. Somewhere, the world was breaking again for someone else. But here, under the quiet glow of a forgiving sky, Madison knew she had finally learned the truth she'd been running toward all along. Healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering without pain. Love isn't possession. It's presence. And freedom, real freedom, wasn't about escaping him. It was about returning to herself. The night stretched wide and infinite, the stars barely visible beyond the city glow. Yet somehow she saw them anyway. And for the first time in her life, the view from the top didn't feel lonely. It felt like home.